Oh, no, it
All
is.
good now.
Awesome. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on in the last workshop today. It's on data visualization. For those of you who were following with us from the first two workshops, this one will be a lot simpler. There's much less coding involved, and it's more, say, like visual. So you'll be seeing everything we're doing. It's a lot more straightforward. And if you had any trouble following with the first two workshop, that's not a problem. We don't expect you really to have finished everything from the first two parts. We have office hours for the rest of the semester that we'll be holding, so you guys come and we can help you like in person and get you like going on those tasks. But for today, we'll be talking about data visualization, and I don't have slides prepared. We'll be jumping directly into um, the demo. But before I start, so we will be using the software we introduced in the last workshop, so it's called Typical Spotfire. It's a very popular data visualization analysis software. What differentiates it from other tools is simplicity. That's why we're going with it, because it doesn't require any intensive programming knowledge like some of the open source tools like R or D3 or any of those. For those of you who know the tools I mentioned, this will be a lot easier for you. And for those of you who never had any experience with that visualization, hopefully this one will be a very straightforward and easy to use one. So without any further ado, we'll get started right now. So the whole point of today's workshop is for us to be able to create a visual dashboard just like the one we saw on the first day. So this dashboard that we have right here, we're going to be building that from scratch. So we have multiple pages in this dashboard. We have this one for the map. We have, if you go right here, you see all the pages we have. We have now one for the number of athletes. We want to be able to recreate all these charts from the data we created or we collected. Something like this, the seat map that shows the number of players from each state, and so on. All those plots that we looked at, including the one that we did for the forecasting of geographic variance, geographic distribution variance, and then income level variance. We'll be going through all of that. So it's going to be a long presentation, but hopefully it's a very simple one because you'll see how this tool makes creating these visuals a very simple and straightforward process. So from the last workshop, what we did is what we processed data, right? We collected it in the first workshop. We got the data from the internet, we scraped the web to get that data of players' information. And the other source was the census data. In the last workshop, in the second one, we compiled both sources into one data set that we created. Of course, one important thing you need to know about this software is that we have this side, or this part of the software is called the front end, is the one that you show to the, like whenever you're presenting the final analysis is what we look at is the front end. We have the front end side we can access from here. They're called data canvas. This is all the data that we're visualizing on the front end side. You access it through this button here at the bottom left corner. We're not going to be looking at the back end today because that's what we did last time. But I want to show you what we had created last time after we processed the data and then added all the manipulation we need to create the visuals we're about to create. The final table that we have is, you can see at the bottom left corner, bottom right corner here, it has the players' information, their hometowns, their high schools, the year the roster was scraped from, the sport, the university, gender, and we have the latitude and longitude. We got those through geocoding. We also did that last workshop. And the city, state, country, and so on. And all this socioeconomic data that we also got from the other source of data, which is the census data. So given this table now, we want to create the visuals that we looked at. So let's start first by showing you how to create a simple visual on Spotfire. I'll create an empty page. Let's go to a new empty page here. When you first open Spotfire, after you load the data to it, you will get this empty page, right? Then it tells you what you can do. You can start by looking at data. You can start from visuals. You can explore. You can have it recommend for you some visuals. But what we're going to do is we're going to start by creating visuals ourselves. So if you look at the left bar right here, the third button that has, well, this bar chart, if you click on it, it gives you all these options for visualization you can include in the page. And let's start by example by a simple one. Let's look at the bar chart. As soon as you click the button, it creates a bar chart, right? That's all you have to do. You literally just click the button. However, it creates a random chart. It looks at the data that you have in the table, and it recommends what you're looking for. It might not be what you're looking for most of the time, but it just makes it easy to look at it immediately. Once it creates it, you have the X and Y axis. You can click on the variable in the X-axis. In this case, it plotted sport and how many rows that we have for each sport. If instead I want to look, for example, let's say university, right? I can select the column from here. This is all the columns that have in my table show up here. If you click on this little square here, you'll see all the columns you have in your table, and you can select which one you want to visualize. So let's say I want to visualize university on the x-axis. It plotted all the schools that we have. And now let's say I want to look at how many students or unique student names that are coming from each university. So if I click on name, count how many names are coming from each university, it shows me how many students are coming from each. However, I have rosters that are taken every year, right? And some of the students' names might be repeated. And I have one student repeated 4 times because, well, they played the sport all 4 years. So one thing I can do to make sure I only get unique student count, which it already did that automatically, right? But usually it doesn't. If it gives you a count, you can specify it and make it a unique count from here. It tells you what kind of aggregation you're trying to make, right? Because this is not a categorical variable, you cannot do like average or any other calculations because, well, it doesn't have numbers. If I'm looking instead at something like, let's say I want to plot the average weight for each university, I click on the weight, and since it's a number, I can do all those numerical calculations on it. I can do sum, average, count, and so on, minimum, maximum. If I do this, I'll see the average weight by university. Well, they mostly look similar, which makes sense. But the point was to show you how to manipulate what you're looking at in the axis. You can change the axis just by a click of a button. You don't need to do any coding. If you're doing this on Python or R or even D3 JavaScript, you know the process is not that straightforward. It's much more like complex coding wise, but in here it makes the task very easy and very simple for those who even have zero knowledge in programming. So after I select, let's say I want to select the unique name or how many unique students coming from each university. One thing I noticed right away is that, well, let's say I want to look at how many of them play each sport, right? I want to break those bars into categories of sport, right? I want to add a color code by sport, what I'm trying to say. If I right click on the chart and go to properties, I'll get all these options that I can edit about this chart. But for starters, let's look at actually all of them. The first one lets you edit the title and give it a description. It has an option that gives auto title, meaning it automatically assigns a title based on what you have in the axis. So it already named it name per university because, well, I have name in the axis, or the y-axis, and then university on the x. I can change that to make it like, let's say, I don't know, number of students by university. And change it to that, just like that. This is the first thing we can do in the properties menu. The other thing I can do is we're gonna look at is the data. In the data, we're gonna look at the marking in a little bit. This is a very important thing. We're gonna look at the marking part. But for now, I just want to show you how you can select the data that your chart is referring to. So when you look at the very top, you see the spacer data table. You can select what table you want to get the data from. The data we did in the last workshop, we called it compile and geocoded, but I have a bunch of other tables that are in the Spotfire file that I have here. I can access any of the variables in them, but because all the analysis we're doing is all in one table, I don't need to change it in this case. So I'll just keep the same table here, but I'm just showing you how you can change the table. And one more thing you can do is, in this page I want to show you before we move on to the next one, is limit data. So basically what this gives you here is a filtering option. Let's say I want to remove any students who are from UCLA. The way I can do it is through this limiting option here. The way you do it is you click on edits. And if any, I know I told you there's very minimal programming. There is some SQL, and I hope a lot of you know some of SQL. If not, it's not a big deal because, well, it gives you instructions on how to do a lot of the coding part. If you have to do it, it's really something you don't necessarily have to do. But if you, let's say you want to filter on this chart, the way you do it is you use SQL queries. So in this case, I'll say like for this column, university, I don't want UCLA to be included in this chart. So the way I would do it is, well, I'll do university is not equal. This sign right here so it means not equal. If I do equal, it just means equal. If I do not equal, if I do this exclamation mark and the equal sign means it's not equal. In this case, I'll say it's not equal UCLA. Close that. Oh, sorry, UCLA. And now if I click OK, it will keep everything that is not equal UCLA, so it removed UCLA from my chart. If I remove that filter, if I click edit again and delete this whole filter, we'll put UCLA back, and that's it. That's how you do filtering on the chart. There's many other ways to filter, but this is if you want to limit it on this particular chart. There's some things you can do to filter from the whole table, which we did in the last workshop. There are options to filter from all the visuals, but not from the table, which we'll do later today. But this is if you want to filter from an individual chart. Next thing we'll look at is the appearance. This is you can mess with like things like the bar width if you want to change how wide each bar is, transparency. There's also some visual tools you can play with if you need. You can make the bar chart horizontal instead of vertical in case you need that too, and so on. These are just some things more visual than really carry that much value. One thing you can do is also sometimes important to you is sorting. You can sort that by value. So now you see the top numbers on the top values are sorted ascending or descending order in this case. You can reverse that too. Another thing we look at is the formatting. Sometimes I have maybe currency values, or when you talk about median income, I need it to be formatted as dollar value. Sometimes I have year, which has to be formatted like a year, month, day, and something like that, or adopted. But I have different formattings for different numerical values, and the way I do that is I go to so when I go to formatting, I see I have both axes. The category axis, in this case, the x-axis, because this is a bar chart. Well, we flipped it now. So in this case, it's a university, and the value axis, which is a unique count of how many students from each university. And let's say I want to make that in different format. If I go to number and say I want to use 1,000 separator, it just adds that 1,000 separated number. It's easier to read, and there are many other manipulations you can use on the formatting for numbers in case you need that. You can change the fonts here for any of the text that you see on the plot, including the axis titles, the chart title, and so on. For the category axis and bar charts in particular, you can add a zoom slider. So if you click on this, if you check this box right here, you can see now I have a zoom slider. I can interact with this chart now by zooming in and out into certain values. I can also add grid lines for visual purposes in case you need those. This is how it looks like with the grid lines. And there's all sorts of manipulations you can do to this. On the value axis, you can set the minimum and maximum values. Let's say I have no values that are under, let's say 500. So I'll make the chart start from 500. If I put number 500 and out here in the minimum, it would now look like this. You can also add the zoom slider for this in case you need that. You can do a log scale, reverse scale, change the scales as much as you need. And yeah, now we move to our colors. Before we're going to be able to look at how many students from each sport play from each university. So let's say now I color code it by sport. I can add here sport as a color code. Now that's what it looks like. Each university student body is now broken down into each sport, and the color is shown here. So for example, the blue is basketball, and red is football, and so on. And that's for each one of the universities. And now let's say I want to be able to look at the numbers on the chart itself. I can add a label here. So if I go to labels and put all, it shows you the total number of each university student count. I can make it for individual bar segments. So the way I would do that, I'll just remove the complete bar labels. And let's add the zooming for marked values. Oh, sorry, one sec. Let's add the zoom slider. It's not printing the labels now because we have so many of them. We have so many small boxes or so many small like segments, and it has a limit of how many labels it shows you of 100 labels only. Well, because if you have more than 100 labels on one chart, it will become overcrowded. So if we filter that, or if you have the zoom slider, we'll be able to see those numbers. But for now, let's keep it for the complete bars. Next thing we'll look at is tooltips. This is what the number or whatever text you see when you hover over a certain chart or a value. So in this case, if I go to the chart now, I hover over, let's say, the column for USC track players. You can see the value, how many players are coming from that particular university, particular sport. In this case, 461. You can see it showing up as like, so I don't need to click on it, just you hover over it and you see this, the tooltip shows up. And I can add whatever I want to this. Let's say, like, if I hover over this, I see the name of the university and sport. Since I already have this sport here, I don't need it to be shown in the tooltip, so I can just remove it. I can uncheck this color by. Now, if I hover, I just see the university and how many students coming from there. Next thing we have is the legends. In this case, we already have it, of course, automatically placed here. I can remove certain things from it if I don't need. I don't need it to show what's limiting by the data table. It's the user doesn't need to see which table I'm using, but they do need to see what I'm coloring the table by. So I remove the data table from here, but I'm gonna keep the color by because I think it's important information for the user. There's something you can do is to break down a chart by rows, columns, pages, depending on something. So let's say, for example, I want each sport to have its own chart and not all of them be together in one compiled one. So in this case, I could break down the chart into columns or rows. Let's see what it looks like if I break it down by rows. If I make each sport has its own row, it will look something like this. If instead I choose columns, column by sport, you see now each sport has its own column. Of course, you see, well, where are the basketball, soccer, and volleyball? Why are they not showing? It's because before we did the minimum 500, and now the values are under that are not showing. So if you remove that, they're back. So just way, if you need to break it down the chart for whatever region or whatever purpose you have at hand, this is one way you can break down the chart. You can do also by pages, have each as on page or by panels. But I think those are the most useful ones, the rows and columns. Next, we have called line and curves. You can add a line or a curve over a chart. So in this case, let's say I want to be able to see the average number of students coming from each university as a vertical line that shows the average value. And in this case, it gives it to you automatically. You can just check this box and it'll plot the average line. Well, if I see this line like that, it doesn't mean anything. Whatever I want to tell the user what this line represents or what value does it have, I can come to label and tooltip and give it a label so it has some value that you just don't see a vertical line by itself. You have a value of the average plotted next to it. So if you click on labels right here and add the curve name, which is the average in this case, so you see it showed up here, and the value. So now it shows you the average, what's the label of the average, and the value. What's the average number of students coming from a single university? In this case, we have 1,467. And that's just one example of a line we can add. We can remove the labels and we put them back. And yeah, that's just one example through of a line that we can add. We can add curves like a Gaussian curve from here. We can add a forecast, like cold winter's forecast. We can add polynomial curves, and so on, power pairs, and all these things. Just as simple as we did right now for the vertical line, but it has to be something fit with the data that you have. For example, I cannot do a forecast because, well, this is not time series data. It's not going to work. It's going to give me an error. And that's all I want to show you for an individual chart. Now let's try to link two things together. Let's try to add another chart and try to have them interact with one another. Meaning, like, let's say I want to visualize the same chart as this, but it has, instead of the number of students, the income, average income per university. But I want to be able to filter it based on the sport I select from this one. Let me explain what I mean by that. Let me just jump into making that chart. If I go and add the second one, let's say Well, let's do another bar chart because it's the best one for that purpose too. If I add the bar chart here, and now I want to see the median income by sport. If I go to the column for the y-axis, it automatically selected the row count for me. I don't want that. So I'll click on this and go down, find the median income, which we already added last workshop. So I already have the median income here, and I'll make it select the average. It gives you the option of all things you can do with median income. You can do minimum, maximum, and so on, standard deviation, variance. I'll select the average in this case. I want to see the average by sport. And now let's see. Let me remove the color by from here. Actually, let's keep in this case. Let's say I want to see Nebraska students only. So if I select Nebraska from here, I want it to filter this chart, the new one that I added, to only Nebraska students. So how can I do that? Remember when I referred when you went to the properties, the second the data properties, we saw the markings here. This is what we will be using. What they mean by marking is this: when I click on something, I'm marking it. When I highlight a group of objects on the chart, let's say all the segments here, I'm marking all these, right? So when I go in the properties and I tell it filter by marking, is what I'm telling it is whatever I select on this chart, make it filter everything by it. If you see limit data using marking, what that means is that whatever I'm marking on this will be filtering the chart to only whatever I'm marking. I want to do the same thing for this chart. If I go to properties, limit data by marking, and the same one that we had for the last one, you see immediately it became empty. And the reason that happened is that it says here, if you look at this option, I don't know if you can see the mouse hovering over it right here. Yeah, you can see it. It says if no items are marked in the master visualization, show empty visual, which is not what we want. We want it to show everything, all the data. And if I mark something, filter to it. So in this case, it's showing you for all the university, the median income by sport. If I want to look at an individual university, I'll go highlight that individual university, let's say USC in this case. And I see the chart got filtered to only USC. When I look at Ohio only, got filtered to only Ohio. How can I confirm? Well, the values are changing, but if you want to be able to see it more explicitly, we can color by university. I'll add to this chart here. Since you see in legend now, you don't need to go to property. You can add the color legend just from here. Color by university. And you see all the schools got added. So let's say I want to select from this chart, I want to select Minnesota. It filtered to just Minnesota. So now we achieved the second important thing, which is interactivity between charts, having the two charts basically interact with one another, have them be reactive to whatever I'm choosing here. They call that as visual queries, is enable the user to filter things based on interacting with the visual itself. So by now we have covered enough about bar charts. So let's look at a different type of charts that we used in our analysis. An important one in this case will be, of course, the line chart, the one we did all the forecasts on, right? So add a line chart here. As soon as you add one, it, of course, again, it automatically creates default chart. It selects its variable and so on. We don't want that. First, let me remove this bar chart. This one. Actually, let's put under this one so we can have more space for the new line chart we just added. Let's say we want to look at the variance in the income over the year. How is that changing over the years? In that case, we want to select the years on the x-axis and the variance in income on the y-axis. So they've already selected the years for us on the x-axis. We don't need to change that. But let's now select, try to calculate the variance in the income over the years. And the way we do that is, again, just like we did before, we're selecting a new variable on the y-axis. We click on this menu. We look for the median income again. And now instead of average, we're going to choose the variance. And what we have plotted now is the variance in income over the years, right? But that's not enough now. We want to create separate lines for each, let's say, sport or university. Let's add a separate line for each university. So another option that we have in the line chart that we did not have in the bar chart is the line by. In this case, we'll click create a separate line for each sport. And now look how messy it looks. The reason for that, of course, it'll have the same color. When I'm break them down, give them separate colors for each sport. So let's do that here. Make it color by sport as well. And that gives it a little bit clearer image. One thing we can try to do is to try to change the scales on the axis. So let's go to the y-axis. After you right click and go to properties and then go to y-axis here, you can try to look at it from log scale. Another thing you can do is reverse the scale. You can do all sorts of manipulations on the y-axis for line charts in case you need that. In this case, we're only looking at how the BIOS. We don't really need to do that. But what we need to be able to do is to do the same thing that we just did before, is to link that chart with the other one through filtering. So again, we go to data, limit data using marking, the same marking here. And again, remember to change this option from view an empty visual in case nothing is marked to view all the data. Another option you have in case you do that is you can leave a message on an empty background. So if I keep a message, I can tell the user, oh, it automatically generates and a default message says mark items to view the details here. So what that means is for the chart to show any values, you need to mark something from another chart so it be reflected here. And that's in case you don't want to show anything if nothing's marked. In this case, we don't mind showing all the data. And if something is marked, just filter to it. So let's see how that's gonna work. If I again select a particular university, let's say we look only at Michigan. It now filtered the values that I have for the variance for each sport for only Michigan university data. So by now we looked at two important charts, the line chart and the bar chart. So let's look at one page from the ones we made in our analysis and try to recreate it. Let's look at, for example, the top high schools page. We're gonna try to recreate the same page. The most important chart you see in it is, of course, this bar chart for all the high schools and the count of students coming from each. But we also have all those buttons, but they're really not buttons. I'll show you what they are, but we use them as buttons because, well, it can just operate as one or function as one. So let's try to recreate this page from scratch. Add new page, an empty one, starting with the bar chart for the high schools. So we just created two bar charts, so I'm guessing we should be comfortable creating a new one. We click on bar chart, it generates a random one. We're gonna change the sports column to high school. It's the category we'll be counting over. And then we'll do the unique student name count on the y-axis. One thing we have to do is, before you create any chart, is remove any NA values. The way you do that is limit data using expression. See whatever category value. In this case, we have the high school. And you point it is not null. You right next to it is not null. And what that would do is remove any null values we have. And now it looks a little more presentable. Let's make it horizontal because that chart was horizontal. We're trying to recreate everything the same. And next thing we want to do is let's sort it by values. So if you right click again, you see sort bars by value. And if we go to that chart again, see what we're missing anything else. Top high schools. We need to have a zoom slider, and we need to change the name of the x-axis to something more readable. So let's do that. instead of unique name or unique count name, we can just change the display name, not necessarily the variable name, just whatever displayed. And in this case, you can call it student count and change the student count. And that only changes the display for this chart, doesn't change everything in the table. The other thing we wanted was zoom slider. And the way we do that is we go to the category axis and add the check this checkbox for the show zoom slider. One last thing, we need to add color by state, which is what we have in that chart. So if I go to colors, I select the column state, it's going to color everything by different states. And here's my state column. And we're almost there now. I just need to zoom to the very top to see the same image almost. Because we're only looking at the top school, so we zoomed all the way to the top to see what we have. That's pretty much it. I think in that one we also had the label added. Let's double check. It's not this one, sorry. Yeah, we have the label added at the very end, so we're gonna make sure we add that. And yeah, that's it. Now we're gonna start adding the buttons that we have on the sides. So let's go back to our page that we're creating. Add the labels first. In this case, it did add for the segments because we're zoomed in. This is something you can do to show how many are coming from each state. We don't have it in the main one, so we can just remove it by removing this checkbox for the segments. And now it only shows the total for each high school, but you can add a number that shows how many are coming from each state in each high school. I think that would make the chart overcrowded though, so we're only gonna keep it for the total number. One last thing I want to do is clean up the legend a little bit. So it shows the color by state, but it shows some other unnecessary stuff like data table. So if I go to legend, I can just remove all this unnecessary, like they're not necessary for the user to see. So I'm gonna remove that limiting and the data table. And now I only have the states in the legend. Next thing we had was those buttons that were not really buttons. It's actually something called a tree map. Let me show you what this is. It's a type of visualization, and the way it works is that, let's say add a random one. And the way it works is that for any categories you want to display, the size of each node represents whatever value you're trying to represent. For example, like if I want to see how many students are playing each sport, in this case, if the largest one is soccer, of course the largest one is football would be, because we're not looking at number of students. In this case, what created for us automatically is percent with bachelor's or higher. So soccer players come from more educated backgrounds, and it's created that chart by itself. We didn't even select the variables yet. But let's say I want to select number of students. So let's say I go to unique count of students. Of course, football will be the largest. But we want to look at other things. For us, we want to be able to use this as a button, right? Because I want to, if I make this filtered by the marking, the same one we're using, right? If I do this and now select a sport like football, I want this to filter to only football. It's already doing it because I already marked it, but I want to create the buttons here. I want to turn this tree map into just buttons. So I want to make all the sizes equal. I don't want it to be sizing by everything. So if I right click and go to properties and go to size, I want to clear this. I would remove everything from here, and now all the buttons are sized equally. And for the color, and again, this is only for design. You can keep some color grading, but what I usually do is just give it a fixed color. So let's make them all like, let's move also the color by. I don't have any filtering. I can choose a color, like let's say, whatever, dark green. It's very light. So now I have this act as a button, nothing more. Let's remove the legends and put it on the sides. Now I have buttons to filter this chart by. So if I select basketball now, it's filtering only basketball players. And of course you'd be like, oh, are all the basketball players coming from one school? And that's not the case. It's just because I'm zoomed in. I can zoom out a little bit using the zoom slider. I'll see all the other schools. And we do the same thing for all the other buttons that we have. Let's see what ones we had initially. We have the sport here, we have university, we have year, and we have state. So let's add all of them the same way we have here in this new page we created. And the way you do that, if you click on a chart, let's say I wanna click on this map here. If you see what the mouse hovering over it is creating this little triangle thing. If I click on it with while clicking Control on my keyboard and then drag it somewhere, it'll create a copy for me. It will copy the exact same chart, but a different size, so I can make it smaller. And I can just drag it, literally, like physically drag it and put it on the other side. And just change the size a little bit. And now I have two different ones. And for this, I don't want to sport twice. I want to make this one into the states like we have another one. So if I right click on it, on properties, and then go to hierarchy. I want to change the hierarchy from sports to university. Oh, sorry, I think this one was state. Let's change it to state. Now I have all the states printed here, but it doesn't look the same as that one. That one we made it sized by how many students are coming from each state. So let's change the size here from nothing to make it sized by how many students are coming from each state. So we can do that by going to size and selecting name and unique count. You see, not a state, this is a comma. We have to remove that again because just like the NA values, let's remove that. So state is not equal, not as states. It would remove those for us. Now we have the comments. The top state is California. And one thing I have in this particular page, we noticed that we have state twice, right? We have it in the bar chart, and we have those buttons. So it's a usual practice to follow is if you have the same variable on page twice, to give it the same color code, right? Because it will make it easier for the user to follow. The way we do that is we go to color and color it by state. Here. But created a gradient, and we wanted to create the same as we did for the bar chart. So we click on unique values. Click on this little drop menu, color schemes, and then go. So we're gonna give it a color scheme from the bar chart. So we go from visualization, select the page we're on. We call it page 2. It's a new one we just created. And you can see the bar chart is called student count per high school. And then match the colors and the values to this. So what we're doing here basically is giving the same color code we have in the bar chart to the button map that we created. Now we have a little issue here is that what we did is we did aggregation on the state. Instead of doing unique count, we need to take the first value. Now it's great. Yeah, we made a little mistake is that we converted the state, which is supposed to be a categorical variable, into a numerical one through doing aggregation on it, which is counting how many students, how many states there is in each state, which will give you one for all of them. Sometimes Spotfire does like automatically select certain parameters for you, so you'd be careful of those. I did that for us right now. So now we created the two selectors, the left and right. I think we have the years on the bottom. So the same thing we do. We hover over it, click Control and drag it. We'll create a copy for you. All right, I'll just change the size for it. And put it in the bottom. And I think those were also overlapped, just like that. Change it into a year. So we're gonna change the hierarchy again to years. And we have the years now on selectors. I can filter this chart now by year, just like how I can do for state. If I select only California, I'll see only California schools. If I select the year, let's say 2014, I'll see only for the year 2014, which year schools are at the top. I think I had one last selector was university, so let's duplicate this one. Same thing, click control, click on it, and drag it. There you go. Put on top, and then change the sizes again. Just go between them and drag things up and down until you get a nice looking dashboard. And one thing I don't need here, if I right click, go to properties, I don't need the labels for all those because, well, I know what they are. So I can just remove the show title bar here, checkbox. If I just uncheck this, I'll have more space to just show the values. So if I want to show it, I can just keep it and label it. Right? This one is university, right? Label university and then show all the options that we have. Of course, it's showing the year right now. So go to properties, go to hierarchy, and change it from years to university. And now I have the universities as selected as well. I can save some space, dragging it a little bit up. This one's taking too much space. I can also give more space to the bar chart because the main thing I'm looking at. I need to change the title on this one, call it support. Again, right click properties and you see the general property and change the title. So let's do the same thing for all of them. This one's years. And this one is states. And that's it. We recreated the exact same page that we had initially, the top high schools page. This is the original one, just a little bit different shades of green. We can change that right now. But yeah, it functions exactly the same as the original one we have. Let's go to the new one. This is the new one. Let's say I want to look at, I think we didn't have this in legend. We can remove the legend completely. So let's remove the legend, go to properties, legend, and then uncheck the box for show legend. Gives us even more space for the main visual. Let's zoom in a little bit into the top. And let's say I want to select only one sport. So let's say only soccer, which schools are producing the most soccer players, and filters to that. So that's it with the Spotfire demo. There's one thing we need to look at, which is the map. We did go over it last time, but show you briefly how to create the maps actually before we wrap up Spotfire. Go to geospatial density, which is this map right here. So how do we create a map like this one? There are two main components that go into building this map. The first one is of course, you can just go to the same thing we do always for any charts. You go on this visual tabs, and there is a map chart right here that you can click on. I'll add a map like this one. But you'll see it's different from the one we have. It doesn't have this I'll say like the color coding for the heat map, or make it into a heat map. The way we do that is we use some R script and we calculated contours that show those colors based on how many students are from each hometown. We don't expect you to have. First of all, you don't need to show this particular map. You can just show it as bubbles instead of having to do the colors. So the way you do that is in a regular map that they create for you themselves. As soon as you add the map chart, it will create a map like this one for you. Then if I right click on the map, go to properties, and then go to layers, you'll see the layers that you see on this map. And I have two different layers. The first one is basically the US map that you see in the background, right? If I if I remove my layer here, well, I will have just basically a map of Earth, literally an empty map. And that layer just gives it has visual for the chart, right? I can just remove it, uncheck it, and I'll have just an empty chart. If I just add my values, you'll see I have where the students are coming from, but you don't see where this is. Is this the US or this could be anything, right? So it's useful to have the map background added, and Spotify adds that for you by themselves on its own automatically. The other thing is for the values here, let's say I want to edit, I want to color it by state, or I want to change the size. I want to do some visual encoding on it. So the way I do that is when you click on the layer itself, you see the settings option here, click on it. And just like now, we have the options just the same as any of the other charts we just used. It's very similar. in terms of what you can do with it. You can change the size of those bubbles based on a particular value. Let's say I want to change it based on, well, let's say median income, average median income, right? You can change the shape or whatever if you want to make the shape by, for example, sports. If you make it shape by sports, it give you the option to make basketball squares, football circles, and so on. And finally, of course, you can change the color based on, and again, any of the variables you want to look at. Let's say, again, let's do university in this case. You see players from each university are colored differently. And in case you still want to add the heat map the same as the one we created, I will share this in our GitHub. I'll share with you a code that we use for it. Let me show you it actually. If you go to data functions, you can add functions from different stuff. You can add Python functions. You can add R functions. You can add all kinds of scripts into Spotfire. So in this case, I added an R script that creates this heat map. And the way it works is a function that builds a heat map that takes XY coordinates and whatever Z value I'm making the color by. In this case, the number of students coming from each. So basically, this is what they call a geospatial density map. And the way it works, this function takes two inputs, the X and Y coordinates, and it creates contours that you can plot in this map. Of course, this is very like I'll say like out of the scope of this workshop, so I'm not gonna go over it. But I'm gonna share this with you in case you want to use it. In case you want to have more questions about it, I can answer that in our office hours that we're gonna hold. But I don't think it's due to how complex it is. It's not necessarily go over it. I think a simple bubble map over geographic will be simple or deliver the message just enough for this project. And that concludes this workshop. Is there anyone that have any questions? We have and even if not during this workshop, we can answer any questions through email or even through the during the office hours we're gonna hold. So if no further questions, I'll conclude today's workshop. Thank you all for attending or for watching these. They were recorded last 3 workshops. I hope you all benefited from them. Those are basically I worked in many data science projects. This is the same, I would say, like process that I always go through, starting from collecting data with it through web scraping or any other way that we can collect the data through, followed by processing the data, and finally analyzing the data and creating visuals. So there are no questions. I'll conclude today. Thank you all again, and I'll hand it over to you, Maria.